Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Discussions of Truth. I am your host, Ian Hamilton Trottier. I have a wonderful guest on the show. And Alan, I haven't been too familiar with some of the stuff that you've done in your past, but you are a stalwart American patriot. And some of the things that I have researched about you, i.e. the ivermectin angle with this pneumonia and the COVID-19, I didn't know that stuff about you. I want you to get into a little bit more about that today with my time with you. But welcoming Colonel Alan West to Discussions of Truth. Give a brief introduction, Alan. What are some of the things that you're doing right now in your career?
Well, I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, back in 1961. Born in a blacks-only hospital, raised in the same neighborhood that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Grew up in. I went to the University of Tennessee, where I earned my commission as a second lieutenant in the field artillery in 1982. Served 22 years in the United States Army, 13 countries, 3 different combat zones. Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Iraq, and also Afghanistan as a civilian military advisor to the Afghan Army. Been married for 34 years. My wife, Angela, is a wealth management advisor. We met when she was a professor at Kansas State University. 2 daughters, 30 and 27, 2 grandsons, one from each of our respective daughters. And currently, right now, I'm the executive director of the American Constitutional Rights Union. I have been a former member of the United States House of Representatives, the former state party chairman for the Republican Party of Texas, and now currently chairman-elect for the Dallas County, Texas Republican Party.
And you joined the Army, I think it was 82, right? And you had
commissioned in 82.
But right now you are in the Texas State. Is it called the Texas State Guard, Alan?
Well, it is called the Texas State Guard. I resigned from the Texas State Guard because I did run for governor, and I think it's a little bit of a conflict of interest if you're running against your commander-in-chief here in the state of Texas. So I resigned from the Texas State Guard. But it is an organization that belongs to the governor here in the state of Texas, part of the Texas Military Department, and it is outside the purview of the Texas National Guard.
Have you seen, and I know you're a congressman, ladies and gentlemen, Colonel West was a congressman out of Florida, House of Representatives. Since you've been in Texas, have you seen an influx? I mean, it might sound like an odd question, but have you seen an influx, Alan, in immigrants, illegal immigrants? And if you have, yeah, go ahead.
No, absolutely so. As a matter of fact, I've been down to the border about 15 or 16 different times. I am a honorary deputy sheriff in Kinney County, Texas,
nice.
Which is right there in between Del Rio and Eagle Pass. And so I've been out there beating the bush and tracking illegals, and even had some that I had to track down and helping to apprehend some of them as part of my duties and responsibilities with the sheriff's office down there. So I've seen it up close and personal.
And you've got currently right now we have an administration that's in D.C. They claim an open border policy. Let's put yourself, Alan, put yourself in Biden's shoes, okay, for the American people. If you had his type of authority right now and governing ability, what would you do to your border, your country's border? How would you handle that situation?
Well, first and foremost, if I was Joe Biden, I would not have reversed the policies that were working in the first 3 months of his administration back in 2021, when he issued 90-plus unconstitutional executive orders to undermine the sovereignty of the United States of America. And basically, he has gone against the constitutional duty and responsibility enumerated in Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, which is the guarantee clause. This says that the federal government is supposed to guarantee to every state and union protection from invasion. So he has opened the doors and allowed this to happen. And really, when you think about it, this is an act of treason because Americans have lost their lives because of the policy that he has implemented.
Yeah, and I want to run a name by you. Are you familiar with Alan, I spent the past couple months, I was down in Arizona for about 3 weeks, and I worked with a guy named Jim Chilton toward his ranch. And his ranch is, part of his ranch is right on the border, close to something called Sassavy, which is a point of entry. So I saw firsthand people from Afghanistan, Chinese, Africa, people from Chad, Of course, majority of folks from Latin American speaking countries. But it was, yeah, they're crossing, and I think it's something like 10 million people have crossed into our home since Biden and his people have administered their policies. What I my thing is this. Abbott won the race in Texas, but that might be open to a discussion as well, whether he legitimately ran or not. I gave you the hypothetical that you were the U.S. president and what you would do. So zone it in a little bit, and let's say you were the governor of Texas, and you brought up the fact that we are in a constant. Well, we are in a. I'm kind of reiterating what you said. What I think you alluded to. We are in a constitutional republic where each state has their own sovereign rules and regulations and laws. And basically, Texas, as we know, Lone Star State was a republic for a couple of years. How would you handle the situation if you were the governor of Texas?
Well, it's very simple, and this is what I articulated and brought out back when I did, challenge Governor Abbott in the primary. And of course, at the time, he said that this was foolishness and it couldn't be done. And I just went to the Constitution and said that if the federal government is abdicating its enumerated duty and responsibility to protect the sovereignty of the state of Texas, well, Article 1, Clause number 10, Section 3 of the Constitution says exactly what a state can do if actually invaded when there's imminent danger without any admitted delay. And so, you take that responsibility yourself. And the Texas State Constitution in Article 4, 6, and 7 says an enumerated duty of the governor of the state of Texas as commander of the Texas Military Department is to repel invasion. So I would just act upon the words of the U.S. Constitution and the Texas State Constitution. I would have declared the transnational narco-criminal terrorist organizations known as the cartels as a terrorist organization, and I would have went after their funding. I would have gone after their possessions here. I would have gone after banks where their money is being laundered through those banks. I would have told these non-governmental organizations that are basically acting as the travel agencies for illegal immigrants that your 501c3 status is revoked in the state of Texas because knowing what 501c3s have to do, they must get permission as to be granted the ability to operate within each separate state that they seek to operate in. So you take away that ability. You do not allow any taxpayer-funded benefits to people that are here illegally. And if you have ICE, which is not going to do their job in deporting individuals, then we will take that responsibility here in the state of Texas to do so. But I would not be busing illegal immigrants deeper into the interior of the United States of America. I'd be sending them back across the board and making it very clear you're not going to enter into the state of Texas, which we have the constitutional authority to be able to do so.
Alan, there's a guy named Michael Yon that I was introduced.
Well.
Oh, you know Michael? Okay. Oh, yeah. So it's like, Michael, I spoke to him for about 2 hours on the phone. This is back in late December. And Michael said to me, he said, Ian, this is all, this immigration northward is all being orchestrated by an organization called the International Organization for Migration, which is a UN agency. Yeah. What do you make of that in regards to, you're talking about 501c3s. What do you make in regards to the United Nations hand in all of kind of this being this in this invasion of our country?
Well, this is part of this whole globalism thing. When you talk to Michael Young, he will tell you that these camps that are established under that UN organization, they're welcoming these illegal immigrants in. They're giving them briefings. They're preparing them, and they're helping them get up through the Darien Gap. And they basically have a path that they follow. And when you look at these individuals that are coming across the state of Texas, they don't look like someone that has walked 3,000 miles. Or what have you. I mean, you see new clothes, new tennis shoes, things of this nature. I mean, they're well fed and well being taken care of. So, yes, this is a part of this globalist agenda. And I will tell you something else that you, Ian, and many of your listeners should be well aware of. Within days, the United States government, the Biden administration, is going to hand over our medical freedom to the World Health Organization by giving them sovereignty over, the ability to declare pandemics and things of this nature and subsume our medical freedom. So this is an agenda that, once upon a time, people would have said you're just a conspiracy theorist, you have a tinfoil hat that you're wearing on your head. But All of these things are coming to fruition right here before our eyes.
Here's another connection that might you well. I'm gonna hold off on that. Are you familiar with the name Brooks Agnew?
No, I'm not, sir.
Brooks wrote. He was a speechwriter for Alan Keyes, and certainly listeners are familiar with Alan Keyes. He ran for
Yes.
president, I think, 4 times. But I asked Brooks. I told him you were joining the show. I said, Brooks, what are a couple things you'd like to ask Alan? So these next two questions here come from Brooks Agnew, and I'll send you some information. Maybe some of the stuff he researches will interest you. But the first question, Alan, is our election infrastructure is compromised, and we don't trust it to place our choices in office. Statement. How can we ensure our voice is protected, Alan? And perhaps some of the elections you've been involved in may have been tainted some way. I don't know.
Well, this is one of the things, and I recently wrote a piece about this on the American Constitutional Rights Union website. It's called the Colonel's Constitutional Brief. If you break down and look at the electoral map, presidential electoral map in the United States of America by county, you'll see a plethora of red counties across the United States of America. The blue counties are very, concentrated in major urban population centers. The level of governance by which election processes and procedures are determined is at the county level. And so I think where we have these red counties, they need to start pushing back against these things, such as unsolicited mail-in ballots, which is completely different from absentee ballots. They need to make sure that they never have anything such as ballot harvesting in these red counties. They need to stand up and say that we have the sovereign right to determine the processes and procedures. They need to make sure that illegals are not voting there. And in certain cases, I think it's very viable that they start looking at, hand ballots, hand counted ballots. One of the things that I'm fighting against here in Dallas County is that we got to get away from this countywide voting, and we need to get back to precinct level voting, and of course all the other things that I've talked about. And we need to be very wary about what happens in early voting. But when you go back to the previous presidential election, there were some very easily understood unconstitutional things that happened in several battleground states. Governors, secretaries of states, and judges do not have the authority to amend or change election law. That's something that the legislature is supposed to do. And when you look at the states where that happened, in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, these were all Republican legislative bodies there. And why would they allow governors, secretary of states, and judges to change the election law there? And of course, in Georgia, you saw Brad Raffensperger, I think his name, go into a consent agreement with a nobody, Stacey Abrams. I mean, why should she have any say in the elections there in Georgia? So I think it is time for Republicans to put on their big boy and big girl pants and stop allowing the Democrats to, have all of these nefarious actions. And if you want to understand what their mindset was, go back to a Time Magazine article in April 2020 written by Eric Holder, where he said how coronavirus should permanently change elections in the United States of America. They laid out their plan, and their plan was to mail ballots out unsolicited all across, their different jurisdictions. And we should have blocked that. We should not have allowed that to happen. I think that's something we got to make sure they can't go back to well on in 2024.
Do you think, Alan? Do you think that some of these socialist, Marxist, globalists, I'm clumping them all together. Do you feel that they're playing their cards too soon? And what I mean by that is, do you feel as you travel the country or whatever you speak with, who you speak with, do you feel that Americans are catching on to what's happening to their country?
Yeah, Americans are catching on, but unfortunately, we have elected officials. I won't call them leaders because they just don't meet that criteria. But we have elected officials in the Republican Party that aren't fighting back, and it kind of goes back. I think it was the movie A Christmas Story or something like that with Darren McGavin, where they said, "I triple dog dare you." And so you continue to have Democrats that are saying to Republicans, "I triple dog dare you to stop us," and we just won't do it. And so I think that this is where people are very frustrated with the Republican Party in that they say, give us a majority. And we give them the majority. And I speak as a former member of the United States House of Representatives. We give them the majority and they continue to poo-poo things away and talk about what they can't get done. And, they can only get so much done instead of standing on principle.
Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, of course, we know Colonel West here is a seasoned combat veteran, and thank you for your service, Alan. This next question here, again, I told you I had two from Brooks. It's going to hit a little bit harder here, and I was pretty active during the COVID lockdowns and opposed to the mandates, opposed to the rush on what was not a peer reviewed medication for people that receive those injections. But I saw, I was living in Miami Beach in 2016 when there was a Zika virus, and that kind of opened my eyes to corruption in the medical industry, and then it filtered over into spilled over to the Rockefeller Foundation and corruption that I think most Americans in the entire country has been living blind to for many decades. So this question is a little harder, and Brooks says, Alan Brooks says, Americans can plainly see that a criminal class has taken over our government, and this is what you've kind of alluded to as well. How can we, the people, bring them to justice without war? This is what Brooks asked. Go ahead.
Well, elections have consequences, and if you go back to one of my philosophical mentors, Frederick Douglass, the other one being Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass said that the means by which you guard freedom is through the ballot box, the jury box, and if necessary, the cartridge box. And this was a former slave speaking to this, an advisor to President Lincoln. So I think that when you look at what is happening in our country, too often we don't get out and vote. I'm a spokesperson for My Faith Votes, and look at their website. On average, in a presidential election cycle, 25 million Christians don't vote. And then what do you end up getting? You end up getting a president that signs a proclamation on one of the holiest days, the basis of the Christian faith,
Yeah.
which is Resurrection Day, Easter, and renames that Transgender Visibility Day. Well, again, it's about triple dog dare you, or you have, agencies being weaponized against you because you're not getting out and participating in these elections. So I think it's so important that we do have Republican governors and that we do have Republican sheriffs because sheriff is a constitutional officer position. They need to start holding the federal government accountable, and we need to have things such as constitutional nullification. That people will say that what you're seeking to do, federal government, yeah, I understand the supremacy clause, Article 6, clause number 1, but you're not enacting in pursuance thereof to the Constitution, to the rule of law. So I'm not going to follow what you're seeking to do. And that's the means by which you challenge it constitutionally, but we also have to challenge it at the ballot box. And Ronald Reagan talked about you cannot, paint in pretty pastels. You have to paint in bold colors. And I think right now we have a clear separation, the delineation between who the progressive socialist Marxist left is, what their intention is for the United States of America, and what constitutional conservatives, what they should stand up for.
Is there a divide in the Pentagon in regards to a philosophical approach to government, which is what we're basically kind of getting down to? And I want to get in a little bit. I know you're a very well-read man. I suspect you speak very well. Aristotle and Plato is something I want to get into with you a little bit, but I like to take a more historical approach to things. Philosophically, this is why I ask you, Alan, because you are a trained soldier. And it was your training to defend the United States Constitution. It's that Constitution that built this great republic from which we all really enjoy, right? It's a wonderful country. But is there a divide from what you can see within some of the leadership in the Pentagon? What do you see with your eyes, Alan?
Well, it's very simple. Everyone needs to understand in the United States military, the last promotion for an officer where he goes before a board of his peers, if you want to call it that, is brigadier general or rear admiral, the 1-star level, the 1-star flag officer level. After that, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, it's all about political appointments. It's all about, the Senate approving. And what you end up having lots of times are people that are, elevating themselves at those higher echelon levels, 2-star, 3-star, 4 stars. They're, kowtowing to the political whims and the ideology of a certain administration. And that certain administration, of course, is not going to, appoint people that don't believe and want to go along with their agenda. You look at what Barack Obama did, and it can be easily discerned how he purged the senior leadership of the United States military because he basically said, if you're not on board with me, you got to get gone. And I think that if there was a failure that Donald Trump had, he did not see that. He did not understand that. He did not understand that this thing called the bureaucratic administrative state, that many people refer to as the deep state, which is very entrenched even in the Pentagon, that's 2, 3, 4, 5 levels deep, and you have to reach down and make sure that you are eliminating those people that are political appointees that rose under a certain ideology. I look at the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. Lloyd
Yeah.
Austin was a colonel in the United States Army at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It's always going to be Fort Bragg. He commanded the 3rd Brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division. Now, I was a major at the time there at Fort Bragg. I looked up to Lloyd Austin. I mean, everybody wanted to be Panther 6 if you were a young combat arms paratrooper. But I will tell you now, the person that I knew as Colonel, Brigade Commander Lloyd Austin, is not the person that I know as the Secretary of Defense. And when you look at, the administration by which he, really, started to rise up in rank, it was during the Obama administration. Even the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles Brown. I mean, you go back and look at some of the things he has said about DEI, or when he has said when he was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force that he only wanted X percentage of white fighter pilots or white pilots. I mean, I think he said like 46%. Look, I was on the ground as a soldier. I really didn't give a rat, what your color was flying in the air. I just wanted to make sure you could put a bomb where it's supposed to be, and you were well trained in doing so. So this is what we have has crept into the levels of the military, this cultural Marxism, because we have senior leaders, being civilian or military leaders, that are kowtowing towards an ideological agenda and not remembering the oath that they took to support and defend the Constitution.
You brought up Frederick Douglass. Are you familiar with the name Josiah T. Walls?
Josiah T. Walls was the first Black Republican member of Congress from the state of Florida, and you were talking to the second Black Republican member of Congress from the state of Florida. So I know Mr. Josiah T. Walls very well.
But
my torchbearer.
But this isn't like, ladies and gentlemen, folks. Josiah Walls did not live during our time. This is 1871.
Reconstruction. Yeah.
It's a black man that served in Congress back in 1871. So, of course, you may think you wonder where I'm going with this. And you were born in the neighborhood. Is it the same neighborhood as Martin Luther King?
Yeah, absolutely. It's called the Old Fourth Ward neighborhood. As a matter of fact, my elementary school, Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic School, was at the intersection of Boulevard and Auburn Avenue, right across from Ebenezer Baptist Church. And our playground, ran up against the backyard of his family home where he grew up. And so, if you were really, good, had a strong kickball leg, you could get it over the fence and it would end up in his family's backyard. Of course, now you might get shot by the park rangers over there because it's a National Historical Site. But yeah, that history was just surrounded me, growing up there in that neighborhood.
All right, so of course, naturally, you may surmise that I want to get into BLM. Where did this come from, and what is it? We know it has to do with this whole George Floyd thing, but
no, it's a Marxist organization.
Okay.
When you listen to the founders of BLM, Black lesbian Marxists, no connection to what the Black community is all about. I mean, when I see a Black church that has a BLM, banner on it, like I see here in South Dallas, first thing I want to ask the pastor, can you please explain to me what Karl Marx has to do with the church? And this is how crafty the left is, in that they will take these organizations and they will talk about Black Lives Matter, but really they're only talking about the Black lives that advance their ideological agenda. You don't hear Black Lives Matter talk about the 20+ million Black babies that have been dismembered in the womb because of a white supremacist or racist who spoke at Klan rallies by the name of Margaret Sanger, who founded Planned Parenthood. You don't hear, Black Lives Matter talking about the fact that when I was born, 1961, a two-parent household in the Black community was between 77% nationally. Today it's 24%. And who was the individual that destroyed the traditional nuclear Black family? A Democrat president by the name of Lyndon Johnson with his Great Society programs. But yet Black Lives Matter says that they're against the traditional nuclear family that was so integral in the Black community. You don't hear Black Lives Matter talking about better educational opportunities or school choice and things of this nature because the black community is suffering from the lack of the ability to get quality education. You don't hear them talking about black on black crime. So when I see the NBA and the NFL and all of these other useful idiots running around and
Wow.
putting BLM stuff on their courts and whatever, I got to tell you, I don't watch the NBA. I mean, after the NCAA college basketball tournament, it's kind of over for me until later on when I get to college football, and of course you get to the fall season of baseball. That's when it really gets interesting.
Chris Martini says hi, by the way.
Oh,
Ring a
hi,
bell?
Chris. Yeah.
So let me get into this here. I was at a CPAC a couple months ago in D.C.,
Mm-hmm.
and I got approached by a former FBI agent, Alan, and he hands me this binder. It's now on Kindle. I've uploaded it. He says, I want you to author this because I can't with my background with the FBI. So I've thread Chris into this. Is something we're working on right now. But John Brennan, the information that this FBI guy digged up is that Brannon had access to X Keyscore, which is an NSA system that Snowden blew the whistle on, and essentially what the information says. This is the first time I've mentioned this publicly outside of conversations with the FBI guy. But Brannon had knowledge while he was the director of the CIA. He had knowledge of these guys entering our country, and he allowed it. That's basically what the nuts and bolts of this binder says, Alan. And my question to you then becomes: this bureaucracy, these ruling classes that control our constitutional rights, they're destroying our way of life. Would it surprise you, Alan, if that served to be true? And I have no reason to believe that his research is inaccurate. That John Brennan, while sitting as director of the CIA, openly knew for instance, they called them it was a bomb. It was, I can't recall the bomber, but anyways, an airline. It was a United Airlines flight. Would it surprise you that Brennan had direct knowledge of terrorists entering the country and he allowed it to happen so that he could cash in? That's a
Well,
vague statement, but just run with that.
I'll just tell you this. In this day and age, I would have never thought that I would see a biological male jump into a swimming pool and compete against females and be lauded as a hero and a champion. So
Yeah.
nothing surprises me with what I see happening in the United States of America. And, furthermore, I would have never thought that we would allow our number one geopolitical foe, China, to buy up land next to military installations to allow Chinese spy balloon to transit across the United States of America. So no, nothing surprises me now because there are such incredible alliances that are happening between our government and other geopolitical foes and nefarious actors out there. I would have never thought that I would see the day when on Veterans Day in the United States of America, people would rip down the flag, the American flag, and replace it with the pro-terrorist flag that flies over Gaza. But that has happened. I never would have thought I'd see the day when a presidential administration would supply the number one uh, sponsor of Islamic terrorism with tens of billions of dollars, or even a president that would put pallets of laundered cash on an unmarked airplane and fly it to the number one state sponsor of Islamic terrorism. So no, nothing surprises me now when I think about the progressive socialist Marxist left because they don't operate under the same understanding and thinking as we do.
Okay, so let's get a little bit more into the historical approach. We're speaking a language that comes from England. Many of the founders of the country hailed from that nation. Let's get into Aristotle and Plato, and I'm going to stretch things out a little bit. But for listeners to understand, there was a difference between the approach of governance with Plato, which is where most of his philosophical approaches is where we get democracy from, which we apply many democratic values to our form of governance, which is known as a constitutional republic. But Aristotle, his pupil, was very opposed to some of the core elements of Plato's philosophies. And Aristotle, unlike Plato, was for a class system. And it was, and you can talk a little bit about that if you like, but really what I did, and a couple months ago I wrote an article on this, what I did is I threaded that up through England, right? So I'm thinking, where the language we're speaking, where's it come from, why we're speaking it, that sort of thing, right? Well, it turns out that the British monarchy is subservient to what's called the City of London. And it's a banking system, much like the Federal Reserve essentially is controlling and regulating the economics, which the U.S. government out of D.C. runs through. That's my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you know better. But we're getting through the monarchy then being subservient to a banking system, and then that is subservient to some of these old lines that run through Europe that go back to Venice and some of these really old lines. So therefore, I kind of step back, Alan, and I say, okay, well, we in our Western societies, there's nothing more liberal, right, than the United States Constitution, and they weaponize these words to divide us. With the information I've given you right there, I want to see where you run with that. Just run with that. What are some of your comments in regards to, again, using that word philosophy, kind of these philosophical approaches to applying these Marxist views of, I mean, they've weaponized the word liberalism on us, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, they have. And first and foremost, I think it's important that we understand that the Constitution is a restraining document on the powers of the federal government. And that's why the 10th Amendment is so important. All of those powers not specifically delegated, enumerated, designated to the federal government are reserved to the states and to the people. We have to understand that right and true system of federalism and that relationship. I think we've gotten a long ways from that. But I think that, yes, you have to start understanding language. And when I think about liberalism, I think about true classical liberalism, which the father of classical liberalism was John Locke. And you have to go back and read his second treatise, his two treatises of government, and understand the second treatise where he talked about this whole elitist system of government, which he termed as divine rights theory. He was against that. He said that it was natural to understand and believe that all of the rights of man come, from the Creator God. And what were those rights? Life, liberty, and property. And so when you further read, a French economist by the name of Frederick Bastiat, who in the 1830s wrote the very simple essay, The Law, he explains what the purpose of the law is, what the purpose of the government is, and that is to protect the individual, their life, their liberty, and their property. Because liberalism is all about individual rights and freedoms and liberties. It is not about what the Marxists have come in postmodern liberalism, if you want to call it that, but really progressivism, socialism, communism, statism, Marxism. It's about the collective and bringing people together and understanding that you must surrender all of these things to the government. It's not that we exist to protect it. We exist to, subsume it from you, and you're supposed to be subjugated. And when you look and see what the establishment of the United States of America was, when you read the Declaration of Independence, it was once again a document that firmly established the individual as a sovereign entity over the government. Because if your rights derive from a sovereign God, then you are sovereign in and of yourself. And the government is supposed to be protecting that life, that liberty, that property. Pursuit of happiness is what Thomas Jefferson wrote, because they did not want people to believe that an individual was property and that they were endowed to own an individual. And so it's very astute of them to do that. But because we don't study, because we don't have these, conversations, because our colleges and universities have become indoctrination camps and centers for leftism and Marxism, and we have sat back and allowed the left to change language and all of a sudden call themselves liberals. It's always funny, when I'm traveling through the airport you can tell, people recognize you, and you can tell if there's a friendly recognition or if there's an adversarial recognition. And sometimes you will have people that are on the left and will come up to you, introduce, and say you're Alan West. Yes, I'm Alan West.
Yeah.
They will say,
Thank you.
things, like, well, I don't agree with, anything that you say because I'm a liberal. And I say, well, I'm a liberal too. I'm a classical liberal. What kind of liberal are you? And it just freaks them out, Ian. They have no response to that because they're so dumbfounded. They don't even know what they're, saying they profess to be. And so, I quickly break it down on them and say, well, I got to go catch my flight. Or sure you do, because you don't want to be challenged. And that's what is happening. And again, it comes back to, like I said, we've got to start painting in bold colors and not these pretty pastels. We have to stop allowing them to take language. Black Lives Matter, okay? Which Black Lives Matter? I've never heard anyone say that. And I often tell people that's how you, go up against someone that says Black Lives Matter. Or the life issue. It is not about government to decide the life issue. I mean, God has already decided. And if you want to get biblical, it said Deuteronomy 30 and 19. So I think it's so important that we have these firm, foundational, fundamental understandings. And, our founding fathers never wanted us to have a pure democracy. But yet, when you see what is happening, and I don't know how many in your audience know about this, but the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, the state of Maine has already said that they're going to sign on to only respect and regard the popular vote. So, in other words, this whole thing about an electoral college, they're going to try to undermine that because that's not what they want. They don't want all states to be deemed as, important in this constitutional republic. They only want it to be based upon the numbers. And this whole thing coming back to legal immigration that you talked about, how interesting it is that the left does not want us to have a census based upon citizens. They want a census to be based upon numbers. And they want to count illegal immigrants, which will skew our representative democracy.
Is this invasion of the border? Is it a globalist tactic to basically dilute the country?
Yes. They say so. Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, we want illegal immigrants to be able to vote. The governor of Shapiro in Pennsylvania, we want to give illegal immigrants driver's licenses. And if you understand the 1996 motor voter law that was signed into law by Bill Clinton, if you go and get a driver's license, you also get registered to vote. So, these people think in 30, 40-year cycles.
Right.
Unfortunately, Republicans run in election cycles every 2 years or 4 years. They don't even do very well at that. And Republicans are horrible at marketing and communicating. So we got to get better, and we got to get bolder. And again, drawing this clear delineation between what we're up against in this country.
So like I said, in 2016, I started the podcast on Winwood Radio in Miami, Discussions of Truth, and quickly I'd connected the Zika virus to the Rockefeller Foundation, the science that they were doing back in the Uganda forest in the 1940s. And then I found a guy at Stanford that was writing about the corruption behind the Federal Reserve System as a Hoover Institute, a fellow of the Hoover Institute. His name is Sutton, Anthony Sutton. So I began following the money, if you will, and that led me to all these corporations and the corruption in that regard, and how they not only manipulate American corporations, like forcing all these jobs, sending all these manufacturing jobs to China, building up an enemy. Talking about building up an enemy, they did the same thing with Wall Street financing the Bolshevik Revolution. This is Sutton's research. So then I get back in and I say, wait a second. The last person that really tried to liberate the country economically got his head blown off in Dallas, right? John F. Kennedy. He was a Democrat. So it has nothing to do really about political affiliations, GOP, DNC. This has to do about, in my view, Alan, this has to do about questioning where the money's coming from, right? And questioning the holders of the money train. So the Federal Reserve, you had $34 plus trillion debt. And, as much as I personally agree with Trump and his policies on many levels, where I don't agree with hardly any of Biden, Biden's, just because I'm America First type person. Still, Trump continued spending money that the country doesn't have, right? So, how do you look at that, Alan? How do you look at the incredible skyrocketing national debt?
Well, it's very simple. One of the things that the United States of America needs to move towards is what I call a zero-based budgeting system, because right now we're on this baseline budget system, which means every new budgeting cycle, budgeting year, they start from a baseline and then they increase it off of there. When politicians talk about, we're cutting spending, they're cutting the rate of the increase. And those of us that served in the military, especially, and anybody serving the federal government, they all know what people say when you get toward that end of that fiscal year. What are you told to do with the resource you have? Spend it, because you have to justify, an increase. Well, I think that it's time we get the federal government to do what our states have to do, what you have to do, and what I have to do in my household, which is zero-based, budget. You can only spend based upon what you have coming in, and all of these other frivolous things, they have to be justified. I think we need to bring back the line item veto, because there are certain things within the budget that comes over to the president. He needs to be able to say, I don't think so. This is wasteful spending. But every single government agency, program, whatever, needs to be justified, because these are the resources of the American people. And if you go back to the Constitution, let's use that as the baseline to understand what is the federal government responsible and accountable to do for the operating of the United States of America. Number one, preeminently, is to provide for the common defense. That's a very active verb, but yet you hear people that want to take the word promote the general welfare, and they want to switch those two. They want to provide for the general welfare, which means more welfare spending, paying your fair share and all of this type of stuff, redistribution of wealth, instead of being focused on what our number one thing is our defense. And you see that making us upside down. So I think that's the big thing. But to get people to do that, it's going to take, a Herculean effort of the American people to get the right type of individuals up there that will take this budget seriously.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that I remember when we tried to pass a balanced budget amendment there when I was in Congress, and it failed. And guess what? People in the United States House of Representatives actually cheered that a balanced budget amendment failed in the legislative branch that's responsible for the purse strings of the American people.
That's insanity to me. That's just absolutely insane. Okay, so as we,
I probably got like 5 more minutes.
all right, dude. Okay, cool. Yeah, because I gotta wind things down. I appreciate your time. What was?
Well,
Go ahead.
I just say something? We touched on this about the COVID issue. My wife and I, we got COVID-19. I think it was October of 2021. I didn't get a shot, and my wife and I ended up getting monoclonal antibody therapy treatment. It took care of it. Didn't help me out so much because my blood oxygenation level had dropped so much that I had to get admitted to the hospital. And I remember, the doctor coming in and saying, hey, Colonel, we're probably going to put you on a remdesivir therapy. And I said, doctor, if you stick me with some remdesivir, I'm going to choke you out, and I'm going to walk out of here. And I told him that I want budesonide nebulizer therapy treatment. And guess what? In 48 hours, I was out. About a day or so after that, I was right back into my running routine. The thing that I saw happen was that government came in and worked with the medical industrial complex, and they forced Americans into a certain therapy protocol. And they didn't allow Americans to be able to go out and research or speak or talk about any of the other things, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, or what have you. We can never get ourselves in that situation once again, where I don't see where the government has the enumerated power to tell any business that they have to shut down. But yet that's what they did. And it was interesting to me in that one of the first things they told to shut down were churches. But yet they didn't tell Home Depot, McDonald's, or whatever. So I think there are a lot of lessons learned that we need to get from that coronavirus, episode, that we cannot continue to have people that Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter. But we cannot have people in the structure of government that believes that they can take an emergency and undermine our individual rights. Remember what Benjamin Franklin said: "Those who would surrender essential liberty for temporary security, in the
Right.
end, will deserve neither liberty nor security." I think that's the true lesson that we have learned. And look at what just happened on Capitol Hill: reauthorization of FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which again, in the wrong hands, is used to be weaponized against political opposition and enemies, and even the American people. So all of these things that sound real good in the beginning, and back when I was in Congress, I voted against the 5-year reauthorization of FISA, which did not endear me to John Boehner, Eric Cantor, or Mike Rogers, who was the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. But I didn't care because when I asked Mr. Mueller, who is the head of the FBI, to come on and talk to me about what positives have we seen for Pfizer, he blew me off. And so obviously, if you blew me off, you can't tell me anything positive about it, so you don't deserve my support. So the American people have to be more astute. And Ian, I want to thank you for what you're doing, because we need more people out there telling the truth, to inform and educate the American people, to activate them so they make better electoral decisions.
Alan, as we wind down here, and I'm going to leave you with the last word, and I appreciate your comments and kind words. I want you to define. Trump talks about deep state a lot. I want you to define that. You've talked about it a little bit with these bureaucratic class. But what, in your view, what is the true enemy? China, Russia, whatever it may be, Iran, sure. But what is the true enemy? And maybe those are the enemies. But what is this deep state? What is that in your view? What, in your understanding, your experience? What is that?
I will tell you that the true enemy is us.
Wow.
I mean, the founding fathers left us an incredible experiment in self-governance.
Yep.
But for whatever reason, we have decided to be complacent and to give it away, and to allow, a progressive, socialist, leftist, Marxist mentality to creep into our country. And we have allowed a bureaucratic administrative state, appointees and government officials, to be the ones that are running our government, instead of having the representative democracy that we're supposed to have. And I'll give you a great closing quote. This will be my money quote, my mic drop moment. Nothing so greater compels a man to regard the interests of his constituents than the certainty of returning to the general mass of the people from whence he was taken, where he shall participate in their burdens. That was George Mason's 17 June 1788 at the Virginia Ratifying Convention for our Constitution. Our founding fathers never meant for us to have a permanent political elite class. But because of our apathy and our complacency, that's what we have allowed to happen. People talk about term limits. Every American has a term limit. That's called your vote. But when you abdicate that, and when you are just the go along, get along type, when you allow people to tell you, as it said in Star Wars, pay no mind, pay no attention here, just move along, everything's right. Okay. Then the next thing you know, you have people telling you, as a healthy person, you can't come out of your own house. So I think this is a very important election cycle where the American people got to pull their head out of their ass, and they got to start getting engaged.
Well, Alan, you got my vote, and I appreciate your time. I want you to run for president or something, man. Come on, dude.
I thought you liked me, man.
What? Okay.
I don't want to have to run around with an entourage. Look, I will do whatever God would have me do to serve my country and to serve God. So we'll see what happens.
All right. Looking forward to inviting you back on the show. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Alan West.
God bless you, and God be with you.